Hey everybody, this is Jeff Martin with Magic City Books. We're so thrilled to have you here for our weekly virtual author series, which we have been doing since about April, and we've done dozens and dozens and dozens of these events, and it's been really fun to stay connected with you, our readers and our customers, and also to connect with a lot of people who may not know about us, and they're following a certain author or writer they love, and so we're nice to get connected with new folks as well. We are mostly doing these on Mondays and Thursday evenings. Most of all of our events are free and open to the public, and we're trying to curate a pretty wide range of topics. So we have everything from tonight, we're talking about a wonderful new novel, to, we do a lot of nonfiction things and cookbooks and all over the place to try to give you something to look forward to in a time when there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of dark news and a lot of really anxious periods in our life. Having a moment where we can come together and talk about books and writing and just have a shared experience is a pretty special thing. So thank you for joining us for that. I want to mention one thing. On September 8th, we have our big event coming up with Margaret Atwood. So I'm going to be interviewing her, which is going to be really exciting. Tickets are on sale for that. That is one of our rare ticketed events, but that also is because she was kind enough to sign some actual books for us, which is a nice rare opportunity to do that. So they're almost gone. So I would encourage you to get on that, go to magiccitybooks.com and join us for that. That's going to be a really special opportunity. And I'm not one bit nervous about interviewing Margaret Atwood. It's not as if like Ann Patchett's interviewing her 2 days before, and like Cheryl Strayed and all these amazing people. So anyway, it'll be fun. But that's coming up. And then all through September and October, lots of great stuff. We just booked an event today with the wonderful writer Layla Lalame, who we've had here in the past. She actually is going to be in conversation with Roxane Gay, and that's going to be an amazing conversation. So that's going to be October 12th. We're going to be doing that. We have a chapter of PEN America here in Tulsa called PEN America Tulsa, which I run. And so we'll be doing that in partnership with PEN as well. So lots of cool stuff coming up. One of my favorite things about these author events is the ones where I don't actually have to do the work. I can just sit back and watch and enjoy and listen. I get to read the books and then actually sit back and enjoy that. But if you haven't had a chance yet to read Immortals of Tehran by our special guest tonight, Ali Araghi, you're going to be knocked out, because it did something for me that I thought was really special. I will be honest with you that sometimes when I open a book and I see like a family tree or a giant list of characters, I'm immediately daunted by that, because my style of reading preferably is a little bit more linear, and I have trouble sometimes keeping all those threads together in my head. So that's why I'm not reading lots of Game of Thrones kind of things. It's too much going on. But this book just got me literally from chapter one. I just could not put it down. And, I was born in 1980, so a year after the events of 1979 in Iran. And I was always kind of fascinated with that period. What I didn't know much about was what happened kind of in a bookended period in the early 1940s. And the book kind of takes shape around these two shahs that have fallen. And the other thing that I really love about this, before I pass this off, is, of course, there's a main character, but I love how Ali has done something which is, he turns this family in some ways into the main character. So this whole family becomes the main character. So while you could point to this character or that character as the focal point, to me, it's very equitable. And that's very, very difficult to do, I would imagine, as a novelist, and pull it off. And this is just a truly successful book. And I forgot to mention that this is his debut novel, which is, wow, knockout. But tonight I'm really excited to be passing off the moderating duties to our friend Porochista Khakpour, who has written a lot of great books, not to mention fiction, but two of my favorites that I would encourage you to read would be Brown Album, which is a collection of essays, which are just kind of knock your socks off essays, and also a book called Sick, which is not necessarily, I would say, a fun read, but it's certainly a powerful read about chronic illness. And for someone, if that's not something you've ever experienced, she has a way of, I'm thinking this is a compliment, making you almost feel what she's feeling, and kind of bring that to, because it's almost hard, understanding what chronic pain is, if you've never understood pain, is very difficult. How do you describe it? It's almost like a taste or a certain sense, and you do that so well. So thank you for writing those books. So Porochista is going to be moderating for us tonight. We will be putting links in our chat here to buy the books. So do that. We'll do that a few times while we're going. And if you have questions, please put those into the Q&A, and Porochista will incorporate some of those as we go. So I'm going to turn it over, say thank you to both of you for joining us, and have a great chat. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's such an honor to be doing this with Ali. I'm so touched when he asked. I actually read this amazing book many, many months ago. It was before lockdown, actually, when Ali's lovely editor wrote to me and said, there's this book we think you'd be interested in, maybe for blurbing. And I immediately was taken with the title and the description. And so I just quickly read it. And I thought, oh yeah, of course I could blurb this. But then I thought, I actually want to write a review of this. It's so good. I really want to engage with it. And so, as it goes, I write a lot of book reviews, and I thought, oh, I'll get it somewhere, but the world changed very fast in that period. So I wasn't able to place it at the place I really wanted to place it. So then I thought, I'm going to just do stuff with this book when it comes out somehow. He has terrific blurbs by several amazing writers I love. And I just hope, there's been some amazing reviews out there. I hope you can not just read it, but read about it, because the discussion around it is really, really fascinating. This is the first time I'm actually speaking to Ali, and I just told him that I am so touched, because this for me is truly one of the best books by a person of Iranian descent I think I've ever read. And if you know me as a book critic, I can be very cranky. I don't say that stuff very often. And I really felt when I was reading this, it's when an athlete watches another athlete and you're like, how the fuck did they do that? I almost had that and then I was like, yay, because we need this book. It doesn't matter who it's from. I'm so glad he wrote this book. In so many ways, it's a book I really wish I had written, because it's a book I needed so much. And I've always loved the form of multi-generational epic. This book has been compared to Garcia Marquez. It's been compared to a writer I love so much, Alejo Carpentier. A lot of Latin American authors were my love. And then, reading a little bit about Ali, I actually might read his formal intro, just because I think there's a few things that are interesting, and then I'm going to let Ali read some, and then we can talk and then take your questions. So as your questions come, feel free to interrupt on the Q&A thing. We're going to keep an eye on that. But I do think there's some interesting things here. Ali will probably get embarrassed, but I like that he's a very, very lovely bio.
You already am.
I'm going to keep embarrassing you, so just deal with it. Okay, so I'm going to say his name in the English way, I would say. Okay, Ali Araghi is an Iranian writer and translator and the winner of the 2017 Prairie Schooner Virginia Faulkner Award for Excellence in Writing. His writing and translations have been published in the New Yorker, Prairie Schooner, Fifth Wednesday Journal, Asymptote, among others. His debut novel, The Immortals of Tehran, was published in April by Melville House. As a PhD student of comparative literature at Washington University in St. Louis, he is working on English translations of Persian literature. He lives in St. Louis, where he is right now. And so we were just talking right before that, he has translated Beckett and Richard Brautigan for Iranians, and that's to me amazing. I mean, of course I love Beckett, but Brautigan for me was kind of that sort of love that you don't even talk about because you're not sure everyone would get him. And so I'm just amazed. I mean, Ali has done so much. It's unbelievable. And then to write a book like this is the sort of book I would imagine would take you your entire life to write. So there's a lot of things I can spoil it with. So I'm going to be very careful in how I discuss it. I'll let Ali spoil it. I don't want to go there, but there's so much in this book. I mean, it really, you will not be able to put it down. It's really, really deeply compelling. And I've already figured out the movie in my brain, or the TV series. It's so incredible, and at the same time just so deeply literary. It really feels to me almost like an Iranian Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, or something like that, that really I think we can be very proud of and associate with our culture, and use it to explain so much that is difficult to understand about our culture to outside audiences. So I will join you a little bit later. I'm going to have Ali read for us and talk, and then we will speak more and we'll take your questions.
Great. I'm very honored and flattered, and I'm extremely embarrassed by all the things that you had to say about the book and me. Thank you very much for doing this, for taking the time to do this and read the novel. So if you agree, I will say a little bit about the novel before reading a short excerpt. Like you said, there is a lot to spoil here, and I'll try to kind of maneuver around them, but I may have to spoil like a little bit, because it's very difficult to talk about it if I don't. So this is a family saga, a magic realistic family saga that is set in Iran from the Second World War until the 1979 revolution, which is where the novel climaxes, and then we kind of quickly read a little bit about, like, go a little bit ahead, like 10, 20 years, but that's the main part of the novel is from the Second World War to the revolution. And at the center of this, there's this family, and apparently this family is under some curse, as a result of which every other son in the family dies young and the other lives as if forever. We follow the life of one of these immortals, these apparent immortals. His name is Ahmad, from the age of from when he is 10 until when he grows up and becomes interested in poetry, then politics. Then he grows up to have a family, 2 daughters, and like, we read about his wife, and until the things he does during the revolution and a little bit after that. There's a subplot of the novel. There's an indication, there's an implication that cats were behind everything that happened in contemporary Iranian history, not the people. So yeah, we read about cats and how they, how/if they were engaged in the revolution and the things that happened before that. So yeah, like Jeff said, this, like, there are a lot of characters. So Ahmad is the main character. We could touch upon this later on. But we read about a lot of other members of this family and some other characters that are not necessarily part of this family, but are engaged in this story in one way or another. So yeah, we could get back to this. Like, we could talk about why I tried to do this, kind of like have this big cast of characters, as opposed to just like maybe one main hero. But let me just read a tiny, like, 2 pages of the novel. So I've read this passage before, but I think this is the kind of suitable passage because it kind of shows some of that, like, the magic realistic kind of taste of the novel, and doesn't need a lot of explaining where things got to be where they are. So it kind of stands alone, but kind of, like, just for the taste. So what you need to know about the characters in this scene is, so this is a wedding scene. There are 3, I think, weddings in this novel. So this is one of them. This is Ahmad's, who's the main character's wedding, and the wedding's happening in an orchard. And there is the guests are mainly in the orchard. There's a building in the orchard too, where the women are mostly there, and the bride and groom's room is also in that building. So the characters here are Ahmad, his wife Homa, Ahmad's grandfather Khan, then Homa's great uncle, who's called great uncle here, and Homa's father, Colonel Deldar. What else? Oh, the other thing that you need to know is that Ahmad, at this point, Ahmad does not speak. So something happens. This is one of those kind of spoilers. Something happens at the very beginning of the novel, and as a result of that, Ahmad kind of loses his ability to talk. So at this point in the novel, he cannot speak, cannot say anything. So here it is. Music slipped out of vibrating strings and throbbing percussive skin. from under restless picks and hands. Great uncle reached into his breast pocket and threw a fistful of bills into the air, then a second. Children dived to collect the money from under the stomping feet. Seeing this, Khan left the circle and strode away from the celebration. Outside, he motioned for the chauffeur to open the trunk of the white Jaguar. Back at the dance, the crowd split open to let in Khan and his driver boy, who carried 2 sacks under his arms. Khan dug his hand into one, and the bills flew into the air. Children ran around trying to catch them as they spun like raining pinwheels. The great uncle emptied his pockets and then motioned at Colonel Dildar for more. As the evening proceeded, more nimble-fingered musicians performed. The cool fall breeze could not dry sweat off the dancing bodies. Until the last one dropped down panting, Khan and great uncle showered bills on the dancers. So much money was dispensed that after the wedding was over and the last of the guests had left, the owner of the orchard spent a sunset to sundown excavating bills from under mud and dirt. The last player of the night was Maester Shahnaz. After the dinner tables were cleared, a humble wooden chair was placed for him in the middle of the open space. The night was calm, except for the murmur of those outside and the chatter of those inside and the chirping of the creatures of the night. The maester approached his chair with slow, calm steps and sat himself, eyes cast down. He crossed his legs and balanced his tar on his thigh. A silence fell over the wedding as he turned the pick in his hand and took a deep breath, his head bent toward his instrument. With the first strum of his pick on the strings, the dead branches of the trees turned soft, and before the end of the overture, green shoots had sprouted on them. A few scales into the rhythmic piece, blossoms opened on the leafless trees. The music was almost visible, floating in the breeze, weaving in and out of the plum trees, billowing the curtains into the house, scaling up the women's legs and wafting around their bosoms. Suddenly, happy cries rose from the bride and groom's room. The bride's dress had bloomed. Homa's mother kept picking the blossoms from her veil so she could see. Ahmad smiled at Homa and got up from beside her to look at the maester through the window. The orchard was carpeted with orange and plum blossoms that grew and fell from the trees. A pinkish white petal sat on the maester's bald head. "We'll be happy together," Homa whispered in Ahmad's ear when he sat back by her. Ahmad took her hand and gave it a gentle but firm squeeze. "This is a sign." After the wedding, the newlyweds boarded the automobile that Mohammad Reza had rented for the wedding raid. Parked right outside of the orchard, the Jaguar too, like all the other cars, had grown little flowers on its handles, trunk, and hood. Sitting in the back seat, Ahmad and Homa circled the streets of the city in the mirth of their unity. Years later, after the revolution and the 8-year war had already become history, when Ahmad walked the streets of the megalopolis of Tehran and saw how people decorated their wedding cars by taping gladioli to the hoods, trunks, and door handles, he felt an urge to write on a piece of paper and show the person nearest him, "That's the doing of Maester Shahnaz. You should have seen the orchard that night." I'll stop here.
Ah, so beautiful. Thank you. I love that you read that part too. This book, I mean, there's not really a bad sentence in this book. Not only have you created, like, to me, a very multi-layered plot, it's so interesting to see how Ahmad and like his whole storyline works with the idea of the revolution and how that, like, there's so many rich layers all throughout, but also, like, for me, it's really important that writers also write well on a sentence level. And you'd really do that beautifully. And so it's just an incredible joy. I really felt like this book was like for me, and I was very excited. And, you know, one question, I mean, one thing I actually just thought of that I wanted to ask you about is, you know, my second novel, they very much called it, The Last Illusion, they called it like a magical realist book. And I ended up kind of calling it more fabulist, even though obviously those terms kind of overlap. And it was just like very interesting. I was using the Shahnameh, you know, or if you guys don't know, that's a Persian book of kings. It's like very much like a national treasure for Iranians. and everyone knows the stories. It's almost like a cross between, I say, like a Bible and like Chaucer, but yet people on the street know stories from it too. So I had a protagonist from that, and I put him into our real world. So I kind of was wondering, like, for you, did it feel challenging? I mean, even though we are, I'm now like 42, we've been here in the US, there is a level of visibility, right? It still feels like we're always introducing like what Iran is and what like ancient Persia is. I mean, so much of the news is all about like the political part of like being Iranian today. And so was it difficult for you to feel like, I mean, in a way, this is to me like one of the first really big multi-generational epics in the magical realist mode. We don't have a lot of that. We don't have a bunch of Garcia Marquez's that are writing in English. So I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah, there's a lot here. So yes, it was difficult, and it did kind of feel like introducing some aspects of the culture to the average English-speaking reader, right? But at the same time, because of the kind of approach that I was taking for this novel, in terms of kind of pushing the history and politics as far to the background as I can, so this was a little bit less pressing for me. So it was not I was not obsessed with accuracy. So the novel actually is not obsessed with accuracy, with historical accuracy. So the novel is trying to build this this universe that is at the same time historical, but also kind of magical or mythical, and some kind of like sort of logic of this world is kind of magical, mythical, in the sense that it pushes the history to the background and politics. So so in that sense, I hope I kind of got the story unshackled, if that's the verb, from the historical accuracy. So I was not trying to introduce to my potential readers who, for example, Mossadegh was. So that's one of the very rare historical names that appears in the book. So you don't read a lot about the Shah. You don't read a lot about the major figures of the history in that time period. So in that sense, I was hoping that so a reader would not need a kind of prerequisite, like kind of knowledge, of Iranian history and culture coming into this. So it's kind of in this in between kind of world of, yes, I'm bringing something from Iran, so I do feel like I need to explain some things to you, but at the same time, I'm presenting it in this kind of form that does not necessarily, this kind of genre does not necessarily want or requires you to know that stuff. So you can see that in weddings and some of that, you can see some of the traditions are kind of being introduced. I mean, I'm sure that if I had written this in Persian, and this would have been a totally different kind of narrative. Yeah, like one part of the reason I said this is very complicated is because I wrote this also in English, and the fact that English is not my native language, it's my second language, and I was not as comfortable in it in English as I was, like, perhaps I would have been in Persian. So it kind of forced, even writing in the second language kind of forced me to maybe kind of be like explain a little bit more even to myself. So yeah, it's kind of both ways, if I answered anything.
Yeah, that makes a lot. I mean, I feel like it's very much in the register for me of the Rushdies, even like Faulkner's Yoknebatalfa County, or Junot Diaz's Brief Wondrous Life Again, or so many of the Latin American writers that I've loved over the years. You know, the fact that you're referring to history, but also reinventing it in a way and making it so fresh. I mean, the book very much has its own mood. And like for me also, you know, English is my second language, but I learned it pretty close to when I also learned Farsi, because I was born in 1978. We left Iran closer to end of 81. And so, yeah, it's like, it's very, I love reading renderings of the revolution and what that means in these fictional retellings. So it's just, yeah, amazing. I guess that's a question, a really fundamental question I had when I was reading this. Like, I was so curious about you, and I didn't know that much about you. I just seen little bits here and there, and I was like, oh, you know, you're definitely like a scholar, and you're like, you know, you come from that background. The book doesn't feel like it's like dry or like academic or anything like that, you know. But I wondered, like, where did the idea, like, how did you even, I can't believe you're so young, how did you even set up, like, I'm gonna write this giant, heavy, brilliant book? Like, how did that, can you talk about the creation of this?
Yeah, sure. I don't feel very young. So the kind of nucleus of this novel formed when I was back in Iran. Was this one day that I was walking on the sidewalk, I think going back home from work, I guess. So it's one of those very narrow sidewalks, and if you know like a little bit about the urban kind of formation of Tehran, you know, they're usually there's a wall of some sort on one side, and the street is on the other side, and sidewalks are not like here where like both sides are kind of open. So usually here you have like perhaps lawn on like houses lawns on one side and the street. So I was walking like on this narrow sidewalk and by the wall, and then I see one cat coming towards me on the sidewalk. Now, again, if you're familiar with Iran, you know that this is like seeing cats on the street is not very strange. Like they're everywhere, but usually they were at that time. Things seem to have changed a little bit during the past 9 years that I've been here. But up until then, cats would run away. So they would look at you. They would eye you up and see. Okay, look. They would make sure you're not up to anything crazy. So. You would see them in the gutters, up on the walls, or like in bushes and stuff, or like ripping open garbage bags. But they would stop what they were doing, look at you until you were past, or just run away. But this specific cat was not doing that. Just like looking at me, not even looking at me, just walking towards me on the sidewalk. And at that time I thought, oh, this cat is kind of, it seems like it's saying that I have the same right to this sidewalk as you do, right? We are the same kind of level of citizens, have the same right to citizenship to this, the city. And then I thought, oh, maybe so. What if these cats that I see everywhere in the city are actually not just like fooling around, living a meaningless life? Maybe they're more cognizant of what's going on. Maybe they're even up to something. And again, it kind of snowballed, right? Maybe so they're plotting something. So what if everything that's been going on in the city has been the like doing of cats? So that was the kind of main image that I had, and then I kind of brought it with me here, and I was doing my MFA at Notre Dame when I started this novel, and then the first draft of the novel was very, very different than what we have here. In the way that I kind of feel like a lot of times I feel like I wrote like two novels. So the first version had 10 chapters, and 5 of which was kind of more contemporary, and the other 5 kind of lingered on one of the main historically critical time periods of Iranian contemporary history, meaning World War II, the 53 coup, the revolution, the war and the 2009 presidential protests. And so like, we would alternate between these more kind of recent and more historical chapters. And then I wrote it, and I had it read by some of my friends and my Notre Dame professors. And then from the feedback that I got, kind of, so this is this also like going back to kind of explaining yourself as a writer of some other culture. So some of the feedback was like I had taken like too much for granted. So yeah, you could say that like people wanted more explanation, which I could see that like for some writers it could be problematic or bothersome, or like some writers may kind of resist that, like whatever. This is how much I'm giving you, deal with it, and that's totally understandable, and yeah, I acknowledge that. But I think that helped me to kind of change my writing style a little bit with this novel. Before that, I was kind of raised in the, so I went to some fiction workshops when I was in Iran, and generally the way I learned to write was the kind of age-old mantra of like show never tell, right? You know, just like hit as close to the bullseye as you can, but never hit the bullseye, right? Never tell what you want to say directly. And then I was like, okay, now I'm gonna do whatever I was told not to do. I'm gonna explain. I'm gonna like tell a lot. So this was kind of a reaction to my old kind of writing style of like showing, not telling. So in that sense, I feel like writing in a language that I was not comfortable with, in a culture that I was not very familiar with, even gave me this opportunity to put myself in a zone that's not my comfort zone and try this new thing. So yeah, and then the second rewrite kind of became this thing, and then the little by little the voice of the narrator as this omniscient narrator started to come out. Yeah, I think I'm talking too much. I'm going to stop here and then.
Great. This is, it's so funny. I'm just mesmerized because the show don't tell thing always really kind of irked me. And I think it's because our very Persian style of like, you know, even the syntax and diction of the Persian language, or even just the style, like when you were telling the story about the cat and you're talking about that, I was just thinking in my head, like, that's such a Persian way of telling a story. You know, it's such a, like, I know Iranians, we talk like that, you know, we'll like notice an animal and we weave it in. And there's just like a very effortless storytelling style in our general conversations. I mean, I would meet with, Arash was actually in a group of Iranians I would meet with, a bunch of journalists in New York once a month, and we would just like sit around and have dinner and talk. And it was just like the most amazing conversations, the way people would weave in and out. And so storytelling, I think, is very important to Iranians in a very special way. And you cannot tell an Iranian, like, just show, don't tell, and just that's it. That doesn't work that way. The telling is really important. So the flavor of narration for me is really what like hooked me in there. And there's a ton, obviously, you show a lot happens, a very plot-driven book, but like that aspect of like attention to narration, I think is like very interesting. And I also like think about the thing you're saying too, that like English, it's very easy to not remember that English is not your first language here. And there's such a great tradition of people from like Nabokov to like, I don't know, so many writers through history that are sort of seen as like, you know, great language writers, we often call them, or whatever, who then come to English and they feel very free. And for me, like, I can read a book in Farsi, I can write in Farsi, I speak fluent Farsi, but like, you know, I don't want to write a book in Farsi. Like that's not something that I mean, I couldn't do it very well, but I still don't want to. So do you now feel like with English right now, like, is this now I mean, are you also writing creatively in Farsi right now? Because I know you've done a lot of translation and things like that. Do you feel like you're going to?
I haven't done any like literary writing since I moved here for the past 9 years, and I kind of feel like my Persian is kind of a little bit weaker than when I came here. I'm not going like I'm not going to claim that I've forgotten anything, but but I mean, I don't have the power to do the acrobatics that the gymnastics that I used to in Persian, maybe because I didn't try. But anyway, no, I haven't written in Farsi for the past 9 years, and I don't see myself as writing in Persian as long as I don't know. I mean, it's hard to predict what I will do in the future, but I don't think I'm like, at least in the near future, I won't.
It's funny how like it's so interesting. Like all day today, one of the things I kept grappling with, I was doing all these errands and I was thinking about this, and I kept thinking, because anytime I'm going to do an event with someone who's Iranian, all I want to do is speak in Farsi, right? And I just kept being like, oh, you have to, because I think actually these days I mostly think in Farsi because I'm not interacting with students as much, or I'm not going to events. So it's just like me and my dog that you might see behind me. And I speak in Farsi mostly, and I think in Farsi, but you know, I'm usually in Persian language mode. So for me, like, but yet, you know, I don't want to write in that way, and I couldn't write the way I do. And somehow actually English's limitations, because I do feel conscious that English is more limited in a way, actually is freeing for me in a sense. Like the fact that it was something secondhand for me, and that there's so many ways to express things in our like mother tongue, and it's almost daunting, you know. And we have such a tradition of like, you know, poetry and beautiful epics like the Shahnameh and so many things like that, that I almost feel like a sense of deep anxiety. You know, I think about like I was asked to do a foreword of Sadat Hidayat's Bufakur, Blind Owl, and it was like so crazy to read that in Farsi and in English and just be like, oh my God, how can I even talk about this in English? So it's like, I think that's a very interesting thing. And it's, in a way, I still think that this book like actually gives the essence of being an Iranian writer without, like, people who are Iranian will know. But I don't know how to explain that, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, in terms of maybe this is a little bit unrelated, but like the writing in English kind of feels like a kind of immigration for me in a lingual form, especially like because I'm like in terms of like legally and like on paperwork, I'm not even an immigrant. I'm just here on a student visa, which means that I'm here until I'm a student, and then goodbye, you know. So I don't feel like like an immigrant in a kind of in the legal sense of it. But on the other hand, I feel like I have immigrated into the language especially because I've been writing my like most intimate, you know, thoughts, and you know, like this is something that's like my life, you know. I love writing, so it feels like a kind of immigration to the language, but not legally. So it's a kind of, again, it's analogous to some kind of like translation in that sense, in the sense of in betweenness of like between two cultures and languages, kind of not totally belonging to one and not totally belonging to the other either. That's kind of like writing in English. It's kind of, for me at this point is kind of like that, especially since I think one indication is that for me, it's hard for me now to write about themes that's about America. I feel like I still have the root of my stories back in Iran. And it's very funny because like when I was in Iran, I never wrote anything that was deeply related to the Iranian culture. And a lot of times I wrote very short stories, very short stories. So this is like, in another way, this is a kind of very revolutionary for me. Like my stories were like few, like not even 10 pages. And then like not a lot of Persian names. And then now I feel like I can't write but about Iranian culture. So it's kind of weird.
That was a question I have too. Like, how has the reception been for you? And by the way, you guys, if you have questions, please do jump in because I'm looking at them, but I have so many. but I really want to answer your questions too. But I do wonder, like, how has the reception been for you, and what do you feel like is like your next project? And like, you know, you're saying like, you know, you're on a student visa too, so hypothetically maybe you feel like you can go back to Iran, or like, what are you kind of seeing in the near future, and how has the reception of this influenced that?
So this came out in a not a very good time, in the midst of the lockdown. So yeah, I was hoping for better reception, but the kind of reception that the book got, I think I've been satisfied with it, especially for an Iranian writer who's like writing a debut, and it's a family saga. It's kind of political, kind of scares a lot of people, and generally, my feeling is that the American literary market is not very, like, at least the mainstream market is not very accepting of like other stories from other cultures. So like taking all of that into account, I'm satisfied with this. That doesn't mean that I don't want more. I'm always like thirsty for more. So that means, but my next project, I feel like I'm still like, so yeah, again, in terms of going back, so this novel felt like when I was writing it, I was feeling like I was kind of going back to my roots, whatever that means. You know, so I was kind of like maybe I was missing Iran too much. So it was like I was going back, taking a trip back home by writing this novel, maybe. So as a kind of continuation of that, it feels like I will be writing about the next big thing that I didn't write about in this book, which is the war, the Iran-Iraq war.
Wow.
So yeah, I have the idea in my head. It doesn't mean that I will the final manuscript will be anything like I'm thinking of right now, but that's what I'm thinking, like kind of writing about the war, especially because I was born like a little bit after the war, like a few months into the war. So like my whole first 8 years of my life was the war. So yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, we're gonna keep talking this book up. I know my fourth book came out May, so I know it's like a terrible year for books coming out, but I feel like this is gonna have a very long life, and we will keep talking about it. And the thing is, like, it is frustrating. And my first two novels are, I think, my best books. And like the sales for my third book, Sick, I'm grateful for that, but like the sales for that was like way more than the two of them combined. You know, it's like it's so very American that people like are obsessed with nonfiction and like reality TV and everything is real. And like, I love that my book of essays, like, yeah, it came out in May, it wasn't great, but I feel like it got a better reception even than my first two novels, just because like, I think so often Americans are just so hungry for like the real stories from us Iranians, because we're still seen as a fairly young immigrant population here. And there's still so much curiosity. And given that like constantly we're villainized in the news and our horrible president, I mean, this year started out with me thinking we were going to go to war with Iran in January. I was sure that like after what happened with Soleimani, that like, you know, that was going to be the nightmare of 2020. I didn't see this coming.
I was almost sure of that. I mean, no, I was exactly sure that was going to happen. Yeah.
It seemed, yeah.
And to be honest, that's still my nightmare, that like in the coming months that might happen, like as something like before the election. Yeah. So that is my nightmare. But yeah, it was terrible.
No, I know it's actually just always been my big fear, and like I'm working on my third novel, my fifth book, which actually deals with the Iranian family at a time of war with Iran. And when I came up with the idea a decade ago, I was like, you know, this is my fear, but it'll never happen. And then it was like very scary. Every year that's gone by since then, I'm just like, we've inched closer to it. I almost think the US will never do it because it's too much of a tantalizing threat. They want to dangle it eternally in front of us, that like, you know, because Iran is such a superpower in so many ways, you know, they don't publicize that like the logistics of actually going to war with Iran are like actually very difficult. But, you know, there's this beautiful threat. Everyone's always scared of Iran. And I talk so often about like what what people don't always realize is like, you know, the anti-Iranian sentiment you might feel it now, but it's been strong for quite a while. And like, you know, when we first came to America, I talk about this often, they had "fuck Iran" buttons in supermarkets, like mainstream supermarkets. And I own one of them because, you know, I was shocked. I found it at a flea market, and then I did my research, and it was like very upsetting to me. But it is a really strange feeling to, in some ways, have like all the curiosity and like people want to know about Iran, but also feeling like you're in this, you know, it's like us and like North Korea and just like a handful of countries that are like the constant evil. So I don't know, was that something you thought of at all too? Or is it something that, like, since you've been in Iran more recently too, do you feel that weird tension here at all?
I certainly did not experience some of the horrible things that I hear people talk about, like especially after the hostage crisis, and some of the other things like the example that you said, the button. And one reason is that since I came here, because I came here as a student, I have lived in academic communities, the one way or another, and I feel like it's a kind of different type of dynamic. People are generally speaking more understanding, more accepting, a lot nicer. At least it's been my experience. And I feel like, so one other reason is that I feel like I haven't been able to, well, not that it's not a good place to be, but I haven't been able to see other like parts of the American society as well. I'd like to know them as well as I would have wanted to. And one reason is that the student visa usually does not allow you to work outside of the university. And if you're on a student dependent visa, which means like a spouse or like a child or like a children of the visa holder, you're not allowed to work like anywhere or do anything. You can't even do volunteer work. So that is very, very limiting, and it kind of keeps you in that bubble. So I feel like I haven't gotten to know the kind of broader America as I would have wanted to. And so one result of it would be that I haven't noticed some of the bad reactions that may or may not have happened, you know. So that's been my experience here in the past kind of 9 years. But like I'm sure it's like very much different than yours.
Well, it's weird. It's like goes in waves. Like there'll be a few years, like when Khatami was president, it was sort of like, okay, things are all quiet. It's like they might still have problems with us, but we weren't hearing the constant. And Ahmadinejad became president. It was like, oh, okay, he's like denying the Holocaust and like saying horrific things like every day on the news. It was really horrible. So, you know, I think Americans now with a president that's, let's just say, put it mildly, divisive, they're experiencing some of our problems in the past with our like leaders and public perception and all that. So it's been very difficult in many ways, you know, but yeah, I love academic communities here too. And I felt very lucky to be in many of them, and like, you know, creative communities. And it hasn't all been bad. So I definitely don't want to say that, but it's like, it is just very interesting. And I sometimes feel like that I try not to think of that when I'm writing, but it's sometimes a little bit there. Like, who am I really trying to prove myself to, you know? And, you know, I often wish like, you know, my work is not really translated in Iran because sometimes Iranians will want to translate it and my publishers will say like, oh, how much can you pay? And they're like, nothing. Like, why would you do that? And then, but I'm like, please do it. I want you guys to just do it anyways. Who cares? But my publishers like, shh. I don't know. It's interesting. So are you getting a sense of what Iranians are thinking in Iran of this too? Do you get any of that feeling, or are you going to translate some of your own work or?
Of the novel?
Yeah.
I'm not going to translate it myself. If something, I don't know, if it gets translated, I may help the translator if they ask for help. but I don't think like people have been asking me, are you going to translate it? So no, I can't translate it. I need to rewrite it, and rewriting it. Sometimes it's much hard. Well, it's funny, like in the middle, when I was writing this novel, I thought I had this great idea. Like in the middle of it, I was like, oh, maybe I can write it in Farsi and not get like bogged by like thinking about English words and like what like all the synonyms that I could use. Like just write it, care about the story, and then translate it back into English. I was like, yeah, great idea, let's do it. So I started like opened a new file, and I was like, okay, well, what's the first sentence? And I still don't have a good Farsi translation for the first sentence, but I couldn't even write one paragraph in Farsi because, and then it was then that I realized that I really realized that this novel had been formed in English. And that's, again, this doesn't mean that my English is good or my English is better than my Persian. It's just that it's a different mode. It's a different language. It's a different logic. And it's not readily available. It wasn't readily available in Persian for me.
Right. Well, and it seems to me like so many, I mean, you've clearly been interested in literature for a long time. So when you were in Iran, I'm sure you were like on a diet of lots of like books by like, I actually, this was another question that kept coming to me as I was reading this, like, you know, I kept thinking like maybe we had read some of the same books and we had the same literary heroes. I felt a kinship with this book, which sounds, I'm complimenting myself, but like, what were the, like, who were the sort of writers, whether, you know, Iranian or American, or, you know, who were your favorites? And
so I have a terrible memory, so I may have forgotten a lot of those that I read, or I may not remember them right now. But like some of the names that come to my mind that I liked a lot before and still now, like Italo Calvino, Italian writer, I like him a lot. I read a lot. Borges, I read Borges. I like Murakami, and I read some like a lot of Iranian writers too. I don't know, Bahram Sadeghi, Saidi, Ghulam Hossein Saidi, Golshiri. Yeah, Hedayat. So yeah, it was a combination of like writers from different, because I read a lot in translation too, and like the Iranian literary market is kind of more accepting of translations. So there was a lot actually that I read in translation from different.
We do have those are exactly like the writers I was thinking of. It's very weirdly like almost exactly, because those are my favorites too. And I always think, why do we Iranians, or at least the ones like I love and the ones I read, like we love the modernists so much? Isn't that like interesting? We gravitate towards the modernists. Well, you could say some of those, like you could say are not exactly modernists, but I would think like for me, the modernist writers, even though I like love extremely experimental fiction, but like the modernists are very dear to me even more than the postmodern writers. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe because I don't know. Like one thing I'm thinking is that I don't know, the kind of modernist trends in Persian literature came in with translations from French and other languages, but mostly French. So I don't know. I feel like there's this kind of like, I think you're right. There's this kind of connection with the modern, what some scholars call modern in Persian fiction, and modernist literature, which came into Farsi translation. Yeah, I don't know exactly.
It's interesting. It's just something I don't know. It's such a, gosh, I feel bad because I'm looking at the chat. So you guys, these are the final moments. If you really have any questions, get them out there because I'm going to still look. Is there anything that like you wanted, like people haven't really asked you? Because something this is kind of my final thing, and I'm going to look at the chat and all that. But my really, one thing I sometimes struggle with, as you know, I often am called an Iranian-American writer, and I'm actually okay with that. I used to actually mind it a little bit, but now I almost, it's the American part that I mind more than like the Iranian. So I'm just like, Iranian-American is fine. But one of the things it's like so often we are asked, even when it's like by someone who's like, you know, same like nationality and ethnicity as us, so much it like will be about like who we are and our identity. Identity falls so much in there. And so often I wonder, like, are there questions that we aren't asked that we wish we'd be asked? Or like, what do you wish people were like Is there anything that's happened that way? Because I know you must get tired, I'm assuming, because sometimes you were just asked the same thing so often when you're of these identifiers, I feel.
Yeah, I was actually listening to one of your events, and like in which you were talking about how writers like Iranian-American writers specifically would be most liberated when they are not writing about their like Iranian or non-American side of their identity. Correct me if I got it
No,
wrong.
no, that's
Uh,
actually
but actually, yeah. So this is this is something that I think uh, has happened to me in the sense that I feel like I would be relevant only if I write about Iran, Iranness, something like that in this culture. So I think, yeah, I think I share with you that uh, feeling of I mean, I would just want to be a writer. Sometimes I feel like this I mean, what if they picked up this novel because I'm an Iranian, because I wrote about Iran,
right.
but not because it's a good novel.
Yeah.
So there's always that. Like, are they publishing me because I'm Iranian, or are they
Right.
publishing me because I'm a good writer, because this is good writing, and that is something that I want. I hope to, I don't know, transcend someday. Like that is why I got very, very excited and happy when this book got picked up for translation into Dutch, which is coming out next
Right.
month actually. So I was like, okay, so it's not only because I'm an Iranian writing in America, right? It's not just the American literary market, whatever it is. I'm being very, very vague, I know. Picked up this book because this is about Iran. So it got translated to one other language. Or you could argue that may be again because of that, because of my Iranianness. But that's a little bit of constant, like it soothes me a little bit to know that, okay, so some another language in another culture is like likes this piece of writing. Um,
Yeah.
in my head, if it gets, the more languages it gets translated to, if when it gets translated, the more I feel like this has been good writing.
Yeah.
Again, there's a lot to talk about here, and
That's like imposter syndrome, though. So, because it's like it gets tied into our imposter syndrome where we start to think that that's the real reason. But I can tell you, as someone who reads so many books by Iranians all the time, like, no, this is not the case with your book. It's truly amazing. And it's like truly extraordinary. And unlike, in fact, sometimes I've been like, talk about cranky, I've really been very annoyed at the choices publishers made. I never blame the authors, but I feel like there's some work by Iranian-Americans that gets out there that's like not even ready to be presented. It's like they didn't even edit it and the person didn't really work on it, but obviously some like, you know, white American was like, ooh, do you want to share your story of adversity for, you know, and it's some familiar ass story, like some woman in a veil and the usual, you know, shit. And it's like, I have very low patience for that because I can see a sort of xenophobia and racism on the part of the editor. It's like, this is what they'll want, you know? And it's like, you know, when they give me those books to try to blurb or to promote, I'm just like, I have nothing against the author. This author, you know, I don't blame them, but I can see the hand of publishing doing them dirty. And in fact, like even your book cover, I love so much because so often I hate the way Iranian books are presented. They are so Orientalist that discuss, and I've fought huge battles for my book covers.
Exactly. So yeah, so that thing is exactly something that I was trying to avoid writing about. Problems of okay, I'm not saying that those problems do not exist in Iran, and I'm not saying that they're not worth writing about, right? But what I don't want to do is exploit those cliches to write something just to get published, you know. And with the book cover, yeah, I'm really grateful to the Melville House team that they stayed clear of any kind of cliched symbolism. You know, yeah, I was like, this is great. I don't want any of that. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't use that font. There's this horrific font that always has like sort of arabesque, like,
Oh,
I hate it.
no, no,
I
yeah.
live in fear of that font, and I've caused a stink sometimes, and people will be like, "Oh, she's being difficult," and it's like, I'm sorry, I have to carry this fucking book around. I'm not doing that. And like, no Persian rugs, no like samovars, like, you know, all that stuff's like, no, sorry, I don't want that. I actually, you know, I am continuing to write about Iran in a way, like I have become more and more interested as I got older, and I think after this fifth book, I might not write for a while about it, but it's like, part of it is just I got interested, but I still am very conscious of how people will perceive it and how they like it. And a part of me is like, well, I'm just happy if people are interested in Iran, so that's great. But a part of me is like, I want to know more about what your interest really is. And it's just a very, there's, you know, it's so weird. The history of Iran is not like that typical colonialist history story. It's a very much more twisted form, actually, of colonialism. It's very intricate and strange. The fact, I mean, one of the great services you're doing is making Mossadegh a house. I hope people will remember that name and will read more about 1953 and the coup and why Iran looks the way it does, and will really hopefully understand that, because I'm amazed still at how the average American doesn't know that, actually. But I think that will help. And so I think there's also a service component to what you're doing, and for books like yours that even look the way they do and sound the way they do, I think this book will be very, very special. And I hope, if you guys are shy to ask questions, I think I'm going to speak for you here, but I don't know if you'll say that. Feel free to like write us and ask us the questions. Like, you can find us on social media. We're there. I mean, I'm a little too there. Luckily, Ali is more like elegant than I am to not live online. But like, if you want to send it to me, I can send it to him. But you can send it to him. Ask us questions. We love the engagement right now. And it's such a weird time in lockdown. It's like you don't hear enough, you know, from people. It's like we're just in our computers. So
yeah, sure. And I realize that this is being broadcast on Facebook too. So if you write a comment there, I'll be happy to reply.
that would be great too. Yeah, and I'm seeing like a lot of like people in Iran, you know, because they're going through a lockdown too, often have messaged me. They've messaged me about today. It's I love that we can also like be like communicating with people in Iran too. Like, you know, thank God for the era of like proxy servers and all that stuff. No, it's such an honor to talk to you. I love doing this. I hope we can stay in touch. I hope you guys will buy this book. I really can. It's very rare I can just say, I know you'll love this book to literally everybody, but I really feel that. Like, I don't know who wouldn't love this book. It's just, it really takes you back to that thrill of like storytelling. It's just like, it's really the sort of book I needed right now. So thank you. It's one of the only books during like this period that I really got lost in. So I'm really thrilled. And I hope everyone will stay safe. Please wear your mask. Please be good wherever you are. Support Magic City Books. This is such a great, you know, like I actually had such a fun time last time I was in Tulsa, a little too much fun as I told them, but I'm going to come by the bookstore hopefully next time I'm around. And please do support these bookstores. Like, their survival is so important for us as a culture. So I very much appreciate that. And I'm going to turn it over, I think, for the final word here. Magic City.
Yeah, until they show up.
Yeah.
Thank you, and for your time, for all the flattering things you said.
I hope you'll come to New York and visit us. Like,
no, I'd love to. I've never been to New York, and like I was hoping this would be my excuse to go to New York, and then everything. Yeah,
we'll find a way. We'll get you with Arash and everybody. We'll take you to one of our like Iranian dinners. They're very fun, very drunken, but fun.
Thanks to Magic City Books too for making this possible.
Yeah, thank you so much.